皆さん、こんにちは。ようこそ。pixiv ワコム主催の Drawfest3 にお越しいただきありがとうございます。Greetings everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us at Drawfest3, powered by pixiv and Wacom. 私は司会兼通訳のマイケルです。本日はよろしくお願いします。I'm your host and interpreter Michael, and I look forward to working with you today. 今回で3回目となるこのドローフェスは人気イラストレーターやアニメーターから絵の描き方や創作テクニックを学べるイベントとなっています。今回のドローフェスはスタディデイとフィードバックデイを分けて開催します。This is the third installment of Drawfest, and an event where popular illustrators and animators explain some of their tips and techniques for drawing and creating various works of art. 視聴者の皆さんにはスタディデイで登壇者から学んだ内容を生かして1週間の間に作品制作とピクシブへの投稿を行っていただきます。Audiences are encouraged to take what they learned from the lecture at today's study day, use it to create their own artwork, and post it on Pixiv throughout the upcoming week. フィードバックデーでは登壇者が投稿作品の紹介や改善点などのアドバイスを行い、プログラムごとに受賞作品を選出します。During Feedback Day, our lecturer will introduce a few entries and offer advice on areas to improve on. Winning entries will also be selected for each program. 受賞者の方には、商品として共催の Wacom から液晶ペンタブレット Wacom 1液晶ペンタブレット13が贈呈されます。Winners will receive a Wacom 1 pen display, courtesy of one of our co-organizers, Wacom. 皆さんぜひ積極的にご参加ください。Everyone is encouraged to participate. イベントを盛り上げるために皆さんにお願いがございます。ハッシュタグはYouTube の概要欄に記載しています。ぜひプログラムの感想は Twitter でイベントのハッシュタグのハッシュタグ Drawfest3 をつけて pixiv には各プログラムのハッシュタグをつけて制作した作品を投稿してください。We'd like to ask all of you for your cooperation to help make this event a raging success. Feel free to share your opinion, impressions of our program, and creation processes via Twitter along with the hashtag Drawfest3, and upload your finished creations to Pixiv with specific hashtags cited in the description of each program, and you might be able to receive feedback from the lecturer. 視聴 URL は事前登録した方限定での提供となりますので、視聴 URL はつけずにご投稿ください。また、気になったことや登壇者への質問は YouTube のチャットでお願いします。Links to view our content were only provided to pre-registered participants, so please don't include that link in your posts. Also, if you have any particular questions for the lecturer, please feel free to post them in the live chat. プログラムの最後に登壇者への質問のお時間もございます。たくさんの質問お待ちしています。Ample time has been allotted during the program to allow for questions for our lecturer. We look forward to hearing from you. それでは皆さん盛り上がっていきましょう。Let's all have a great time together. それでは早速一つ目のプログラムから参りましょう。Without further ado, let's get the show on the road. 一つ目のプログラムは Guweiz と学ぶ影に潜むかっこいい女性の描き方です。Our first program is Learn with Guweiz, How to Draw Cool Female Characters in the Shade. 本プログラムでは登壇者の Guweiz さんより独自の世界観の中に存在する凛々しい女性を表現するための技法をグレースケールラフから解説します。In this program, our lecturer Guweiz will introduce and explain techniques to create a work featuring a dignified female character who exists within a unique worldview. The program will start off with a grayscale rough sketch. プログラムの間に使う作画過程の PSD は説明欄のリンクからダウンロードできますので、手元で開いておくとより分かりやすくなります。The PSD files of the drawing processes used during the program can be downloaded via the link in the description below. The tutorial will be easier to understand if you have it open and at hand. Now let's start the program with our lecturer, Guweiz. それでは、Guweiz さんによるプログラムのスタートです。Guweiz 驚異の画力で見せるシンガポール在住のイラストレーター。17歳で絵を描き始め、わずか数年で日本をはじめ世界中にファンを獲得。人の心を引きつけるシーンやキャラクターを描く。画集 The Art of GUWEIZ が発売中です。Guweiz is an illustrator based in Singapore whose incredible talent has captivated countless fans. He was 17 when he first started drawing, and it only took a few years for his art to gain popularity around the world. The scenes and characters he draws are a delight to the senses. His art book, The Art of GUWEIZ, is now on sale. Guweiz-san, よろしくお願いします。Guweiz, thank you so much today for joining us.
Hello everyone, I'm Guweiz, and nice to meet everyone. Thank you for having me.
Of course, it's a pleasure. 早速ではございますが、プログラムをスタートしたいと思います。プログラムの後、皆さんからのご質問にお答えしたいと思いますので、気になったことは YouTube のチャットをお願いします。Alright, so let's get started. After the lecture, we'd like to answer any questions you may have, so please leave a comment on the live chat if there's anything you'd like to ask. Now, enjoy the show. それではご覧ください。どうぞ。
In this pixiv Drawfest3 workshop, we'll be going through the topic of how to draw cool female characters using dramatic lighting. So normally, a lot of times I find that dramatic lighting can be hard to approach because sometimes when we want to draw a character and we struggle with some of the details and some of the design, after all, there are so many parts to drawing. So naturally, sometimes lighting feels like this extra thing that you do not want to think too much about. However, one of the most fun experiences I have is whenever I draw a scene or a character with really interesting lighting effects or different lighting angles, right, to bring out a specific mood or a specific sort of feeling from the viewer. So hopefully in this workshop, I'll be able to share with you how I do this and explain to you some of the simple things that you can try out for yourself to really just have fun and explore more different lighting alternatives and add a bit more spice to your own work as well. So let us begin. So here are some examples of my own work in which I used some dramatic lighting effects. So the idea behind a lot of these is to use light in a way that it reveals part of the character in an interesting way, or it highlights the silhouette of the character, and also to sort of emphasize the physical setting the character is in as well. So I feel like this sort of method really helps not only to just make the image look more interesting at first glance, but also to help create a more sort of almost immersive situation or in a way construct a full scene just by using lighting as well. So this is what we will mainly be talking about in this video, and let us move on to the tutorial outline. There are two parts to this overall workshop. Part A is this video and talking about how we sort of basically just go about the process of creating the characters like in these examples, right? How do we draw the sketch of the character, and then how do we apply the lighting step by step? So this is mainly today's workshop and part A of this overall process, right? And part B, we'll talk more about it later, but it's basically something that you can follow along yourself as well. So in part A, I think the process can be broken down into two main pieces, right? And one is designing cool characters. So it helps a lot that sometimes as you go into drawing the piece with dramatic lighting and all that you have like an interesting character design to start from. So this is sort of the base of the situation, right, where you begin with, and then after that we can talk about applying special lighting, which is right the process of adding on this dramatic lighting setup, how to make things look organized but also look really interesting, and so on and so forth, right? So from these, we also break it down a bit more. For example, using references and then adding your own preference, right? That's how you kind of like design, and then or at least create a draft of a design of a character that you find interesting. And then after that, you can choose a lighting plan, right? Do you want the light to come from the left, from the right, from below, right? So that is sort of kind of like the decision process, and then finally applying the lighting accurately. So moving on to designing cool characters. As you can see here, I have a whole bunch of references that I pulled up. And for the purposes of this sort of short tutorial, I'll keep it a bit simpler, right? So a lot of times I think a lot of excellent character designs come from a lot of good real world references. They're oftentimes assembled from a variety of sources, from perhaps even crossing time periods or entire fashion styles, right? So you can sort of look at what makes a design interesting to you, pick out various parts of it that you find super attractive or super appealing or interesting just in general, and then combine and mix them up, and then basically just add your own preference, right? So this is sort of the concept that I feel like is really central to designing really any kind of character, having like a good basis in reality, but you want to add in your own preference and then make your own sort of style be felt as well. So in this process, I will definitely encourage everyone to try your best in designing your own character, have fun thinking about what you feel is cool, because after all, the whole point of the workshop is to help you have fun drawing your own characters using cool lighting as well. So I'm not going to elaborate too much about like a full design process for the purposes of this video, but I definitely am looking forward to seeing everyone explore their own ideal cool character. So once we have our basic character design in mind, another thing to plan for before we begin drawing is choosing a lighting plan to go for. So here are some examples just to really demonstrate the variety of plans that you can choose. For example, a light comes from behind, the point of view. The light comes from in front of the point of view, but behind the character they were looking at, and in multiple directions. Or the lighting can come from above, but obscure a substantial portion of the character, right? Because it's not from above and in front, it's from straight above. So you still have plenty of shadows and, sort of these moody kind of dark areas to work with as well. Or we can also have sort of the lighting sandwich the character from in front and behind in two sort of angles. And then we can create this effect as well. So this is just some examples, and feel free to sort of choose your own lighting plan later on as well, right? But this is just saying that in part of the process, choosing a plan is important. And then last but not least, right, we also need to apply things accurately. A lot of times we get really used to drawing a character with a simple lighting setup or a lighting setup that we're used to. And in that sense, it is probably useful to remind ourselves when we are doing a different lighting setup that we still need to respect the fundamentals and make sure, like, as we light different surfaces, we have to respect their actual volume, their actual shapes, and how the light works around them as well. So in this case, I think I did not too bad a job, right? Which is why I'm using this as an example. For example, I managed to sort of contain the sort of bluish light that comes from over here in a good way to make sure that it only hits the correct surfaces, as well as this secondary light coming from the right, to make sure it hits the relevant surfaces as well. Right, so this is kind of like example where the yellow areas are sort of where the bluish strong light comes from, right? Like all the areas that are relevant to it. And the green areas are where the secondary light comes from. So this is sort of the split, then this sort of like a basic split of what we should be thinking about as we paint and as we proceed with the creation of the piece itself. So this is the basic breakdown done. And then now next we can talk about how to step by step create this painting, which is the example or demo piece that I prepared for this particular workshop this time. So yeah, without further ado, let's head to the process of creating this piece step by step. So the first step is almost always to begin with a line sketch. So the purpose of a line sketch is really quite simple. The idea is that you want to have something that is rough and adjustable, but can present a lot of information for how much work is needed to create it. So a line sketch is our best option in this case, right? Because we want to make sure to carry over and present the design that we want. In this case, I'm just choosing to draw a simple suit because it's sort of the most basic option for like a quote unquote cool character. So that is the option that I've gone for. And because I'm drawing everything out with lines, I can make it look quite clear and quite clear cut as well. At the same time, we can also figure out the pose, figure out sort of how the character will fill the frame, as well as think about the perspective and add in a bit more details here and there to sort of flesh out the feel of the pose and the character and the general scene as a whole. So that is sort of stage one, the line sketch. Moving on to the next step, this is the base values, which I've added here to the line sketch. So what I like to do is to have like a dark color, especially since right now we're talking about drawing like a character in shadow using dramatic lighting. I find that it's good to give the sort of background like a base gray, right? A base dark gray. So this is useful for generally lowering the brightness of the overall scene and kind of bringing it a bit closer to its sort of almost final stage. So it's a bit easier to read the drawing for yourself and make adjustments later on. So in the value stage or the base value stage, aside from the background, right, we want to capture the main value groups of our subject here as well. So we can split those into a couple of groups. For example, the hair and suit of the character is really dark, so you can split that into group 1 or group A. And then we can have the skin tone of the character in group B, and then the sort of white inner shirt of the character being group C. So these are the three main value groups, and the purpose of the base value stage is to separate them out. And the reason for doing this is because we know that these materials are really distinct in appearance. So we want them to have this strong relationship right from the onset before we add in any lighting, right? Because after we add lighting, we are going to sort of perceive the situation as a whole. So when we do that, we want to make sure that, for example, our light that hits our dark shirt, our dark suit coat here, is going to be reflected appropriately, right? Compared to say the light which hits this white collar, which will be really, really bright. So we want to make sure our impressions are on point once we proceed to the stage after these. So here is where things get a slightly more complicated. This is where we start introducing multiple lights, right? Which is the theme of the tutorial, right? Introducing dramatic lights. But not to worry, we can do this in 3 simple stages. Stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3. And these 3 steps are me working out what light I want, what direction they come from, and then drawing them in one at a time. So in step 1, I decided, okay, I want a strong light to come from behind the character from a certain angle. And so the entire step, right, is just dedicated to doing this. So as you can see here, compared to the base value stage, all I did was to add these white areas of light to the appropriate surfaces where the character's body and the character's sort of volume, the 3D structure of the character can receive the light. So this is really straightforward, but it does require you to be a bit careful and think about what areas receive what light. So for example, here I didn't realize earlier on that, for example, right, we can add actually a bit more light to the palm of the hand or the side of the hand here, right, because this area here is exposed to the light as well, right? Can have almost a bit of light here and a bit of light here. So this is step 1, where we decide, okay, we want the backlight, and then we apply it in this way. So step 2 is where I decide to apply, okay, so we want to have a character in like a dark area, but we also want to have the feeling that the character is in like an open space. So usually to help do that, we want to give the idea that there's a high ceiling, right? Or infinitely high ceiling. So generally how we do that is to make sure like the top facing areas of the character, like for example, the top of the head, let me use a different color. For example, the top of the head, the part of the shoulders and the chest that is facing upwards, right? And the part of the waist that is contouring upwards as well. These areas, right, all receive a bit of light. So this creates the impression that, for example, in this situation, our character is sort of exposed to like an open sky or something, right? Because it's less sort of cramped and occluded as compared to from below, where it's in relative shadow. Okay, so this is my explanation for why we're using the top light. So how do we apply the top light is almost the same concept. We basically just want to look at our character. Again, in this case, we're going back to the base value stage because we're doing it step by step, right? So we've gone back to the base value stage and added sort of a light that comes from on top in this area, in this area, in this area, a little bit on the fingers, as well as this area. So these are the main areas of concern that we will be adding the light to. So once we're done that, we can look at our next sort of light source, which is another side light that we want to come from this direction. So this is another pretty much the same process, right? But we have to, again, think of the character in 3D in order to figure this out. So sometimes what I also do find helpful is that, let's say we have some trouble visualizing, right? Okay, how should things look like if a light comes from this angle from a character? So in this situation, my personal recommendation is, as always, right, we want to look up some references of dramatic lighting. For example, if you recall in certain movies, or rather in a lot of movies when we have dark scenes, you'll notice how they do the lighting is to almost always, right, have this sort of small accent light from the side to reveal the characters a little bit and keep them mysterious. So, right, my recommendation is if you have trouble, always look for reference, and then as you apply it, think about what kind of surfaces that the light is hitting and how to best depict them. But to put things shortly, or a bit more simply, we also figure out the surfaces where the light coming from the right will hit, and then we capture them as well. Right, so this is sort of the areas where a light coming from the right side will hit. And then once we have all three pieces of the puzzle, the backlight, the top light, which is a bit weak, as well as the side light, we can combine them into this piece here, or rather this stage here, right? As you can see, I said combine. And we can do this quite simply. And I will actually provide the Photoshop file for all these steps so you can actually figure out how exactly it's done. So not to worry too much about the technical details, right? So now I just want to explain that once we have all these three things, we can combine them and then we have this complete, almost complete sort of effect, right? We have the top light, we have the side light, and then we have the strong light that comes from behind the character. And then once we reach this stage, we have a good idea of what our character or what our scene or what our piece might look like. We can start adjusting the values using this very helpful curves tool as well, as you can find here, right, under curves. So this tool is really good because once we have the relationship between all our values, because once we have gone through these three stages, we have a good relationship between all our values. We can use the curves tool to adjust the values sort of as a group. So now we're done with this basic part, right? I applied the curves and played with it a little bit to achieve this next stage. So all I did from here to here is to use curves, darken the suit and the hair a bit to create a bit more sort of contrast in the local values. And we're at this stage. So at this point in time, I'm looking at the drawing and I'm thinking, okay, we're quite close to the exact values that we will be using for the final piece. We can start introducing color. And how I like to do color is also quite methodical as well. So as always, I like to add local color, for example, the skin tone, and for example, the color of this like band on the character's hair. I want to add that using a soft light layer and then just paint over it with the relevant color. If we want to change that, we can simply select the layer of this color and then adjust the color, right? Or adjust the saturation. So this is a really organized way to do things. And because this piece is quite simple, right? There really isn't too much local color to worry about. We basically have to worry about the skin tone and like this extra band over here. Because quite obviously, right, we have like a monochromatic clothing for the character as well. So fortunately for us, this part is quite simple. And of course, we can also remember to like draw the filter on the cigarette here, which might be a slightly different color, but this is really a small part. You can paint it in manually later as well. So in this situation, I didn't really care about that. So the next step is, now that our local colors are done, in this case, it was really quick, we can start thinking about the lighting color. I'll begin with the side light. So the side light, I actually wanted it to be a deep red, because the idea is that red is usually a really good color to use as an accent color in a situation where you don't want it to be too strong, because red is almost like a dark light in a sense, because red is something that we don't see too well, I believe. So it tends to not appear really bright. So it serves quite well in contrast to, for example, this really strong light from the left side. So in this case, I use a bit of red and then colored over the area where I designated my soft light, my side light is. Right, so I basically color all the corresponding areas with like a orange overlay layer. Right, in this case, I used the overlay layer and then I just painted orange over these relevant areas. So quite straightforward as well. Next, we can start working on the other light, the backlight, right? The backlight all the way from here. Right, we can start working on the backlight and introduce color to it as well. So in this situation, the option is quite simple. I just wanted like a contrast in color. So obviously blue contrasts really well with this reddish orange. And so that is what I use for the color here. So again, simply use overlay layer, paint over the relevant areas, right? The fingers here as well. And a bit of area here near the creases of the waist and a bit on the arms of the character's suit. And then once that is done, we can add in the relevant background color as well. So this part is quite simple. We simply look at the drawing and say, okay, our dominating light in a sense is this blue light here, right? The whole, for example, wider world out there is in like perhaps at night. So we're gonna have this dark blue for the night as well. And then that is why we have the overall like mood sort of ambient color be this sort of blue, right? Whereas the red stays in like a more localized accent color. So this is sort of me explaining why I picked the choice. And because we have this sort of ambient color, we can also think about our top light, right? Remember our weak top light? This is where it comes in as well. I added a bit of blue to that area. As you can see, once we have sort of the basic structure, I'm more comfortable to go a bit freeform, but the concept and the sort of flow remains the same. We want to assign colors to each of the light sources and then make sure the color as a whole conforms to the overall scene ambient color as well. So this is this stage, right, where we have almost all our values and colors in the right place. And then here's is something that we can try as well. So I decided, okay, so I want the top to be, or rather the area that is high up to be a bit brighter. So I added in a gradient. This is completely optional. It depends on your personal taste as well, but this is just me explaining what happened here. And then the next part here is slightly more complex. So so far, we've talked about some really, really simple and straightforward mechanical stuff that we can break down really easily, right? And it has served us quite well because it's allowed us to get to a point where we basically have most of the piece, on lockdown. We know all our local values, we know all our local colors, we know where and how each of our lights will hit the character, we know what color all of those lights are respectively. Right, so we've come really far, but the next step is where things get slightly more difficult and slightly more requiring of how do I put it, fundamental knowledge, and perhaps some references will also be really helpful here. And this is because we are adding some shadows and occlusion shadows as well. So what this mainly means is that we need to look at the structures on a character and then start breaking them down into finer details, right? Because we know that a suit isn't just like consists of two surfaces, one surface that receives light from top and one doesn't. There are, of course, right, nuances in the folds and the creases of a suit, really just anything in the scene as well. So for example, here I decided, okay, I need to add a bit of darker red to the area of the character's cheek that is facing up, because the hair might be covering up some of the otherwise, weak top light that, for example, the shoulders are receiving. So this is basically this part of the process where I start adding in this occluding shadows and then start figuring out how the piece should basically be drawn at like a quote-unquote higher resolution, right? Because this is a really simple, or in like 3D terms, it's like a really low poly setup. But here is where we have to go a bit more high poly, because right, eventually we have to start proceeding to doing the illustration itself. And the next is, once we have like a basic sort of low mid poly almost setup, right, where we account for the detail in like a reasonable way, we have to start like really going into detail on how each and every area is accounted for. For example, like going through the gradients here, making sure each area has its correct sort of response to the light. So notice here, right? For example, the orange was really even. The orange on the hair is pretty much equal to the orange on this part of the character's shirt, which is not good, right? Because we know the shirt is white and is really reflective of any light that comes to it. So in this situation, I wanted to start, right, making adjustments to relevant areas, like for example, making this area that reflects the side light really bright, right? This area is really bright. Same with this area. So these are some of the considerations that I'm making as the piece proceeds. At this stage, I'm painting a bit more organically. I'm less concerned with doing things too step by step. But this is still, right, the general concept that we're going for, going into more and more detail. And basically, in 3D terms, right, being more high poly in our way of thinking of the piece. So for the purpose of this tutorial, we've really covered sort of the meat, right, which is the breakdown of how to add the light, how to plan the light, how to edit, and then how to start transitioning from that into a more finished piece. So from here on, I will be skipping a few steps for the purpose of this tutorial, and then we are going to jump to the next step, which is almost near the end, right? But as you can see here, the important thing is that the overall sort of composition remains almost identical. Everything remains pretty much the same, right? Of course, there are substantial changes in like the sort of how do I put it, the completion level and the detail level of the piece, but really that is just a matter of time and spending time just rendering the details over and over again until you get where you want. So yeah, this is the final part already, the final transition to the next step. And I like to think of it as a step where I really go in and start removing all these lines. Remember our earliest line sketch, right? It's been accompanying us until right this point in time. So personally, my style is to remove them. And so this is what I do in the final step, right? Paint over them, assign the relevant light to it, assign the relevant lighting, and the relevant texture, right? How sharp an edge should be, and all that good stuff. So once that is done, we can add a bit more special effects, for example, like the smoke here, as well as some rough brushes to represent blood stains, just to make like the scene a bit more interesting. So yeah, this is a quick and simple breakdown of the process to create this particular drawing on this particular character from the line sketch. So to go over the whole process a bit more simply, no worries, because all these images here are provided as well. We basically begin with a simple line sketch to show off or to present to ourselves, in a sense, our design, make sure everything lines up. And then we add in the base values, account for each of our lighting setups separately, combine them, make an adjustment to get closer to our final values. And then we add in some local colors to basically start filling them in. And then we add in some lighting color, right? Adjust the background color here, which is quite relevant in our situation because we don't really have a specific like background. So we just want to match the same sort of color and ambience of like our main light here, which is sort of this dark blue. Add a bit of gradient, right, which is again optional. And then basically from here on out, it's just drawing everything following, right, really following our lighting plan, but in more detail. And yeah, that is it for the process of creating this piece. I hope you have found the process breakdown useful, and because of time constraints, I wasn't able to explain everything in depth, but now is a chance for everyone to ask their questions, and I'll answer as many of them as I can. So let us begin.
では皆さんいかがでしたでしょうか Hope you all enjoyed that video. こちら、グエイスさんからライティング、明度の扱いから影にいるかっこいい女性キャラクターイラストを作る手順を説明いただきました。Here, Guweiz explained the steps to creating an illustration of a cool female character in the shade by how to approach dramatic lighting. グエイスさんから皆さんに一番伝えたいポイントやぜひ実践してほしいスキルなどはありますか So, Guweiz, is there any points you'd like to highlight from that lecture or share with everyone? Any skill that you'd like everyone to practice in general?
So thank you everyone for watching the video.
皆さんビデオをご覧いただきありがとうございました。
So there's just one point I would like to really highlight.
一つだけ強調したいポイントがございます。
When we were talking about the 3 different lights, I wanted to emphasize these 2 really important things.
3種類のライティング、照明の話をしていた時に関して、この3つのポイントを少し強調したいと思います。
So number 1 is that we really want to make sure each of our lighting is very clear in terms of ranking.
まず一つは、この3種類の照明はそれぞれ順位がしっかりついているということを強調しておきたいと思います。
For example, our number 1 light is the obvious strongest, while our number 2 light is somewhere in between, and our number 3 light is really weak.
このように1番のバックライトは最も強力な光、最も強力な照明で、2番はその真ん中、3番トップライトは最も弱い光となります。
So the main lesson here that I want to remind everyone is to make sure you keep each of your lighting separate.
なので、こちらで一番強調したいのは、これらの光をしっかりと分けておくということになります。
Okay. Otherwise, the video has really already been quite long, so I don't have too much to add, except to really just have fun.
それ以外ですと、十分動画も長くなっていますので、特に加えることはありますね。とにかく絵を描くのを楽しんでくださいということだけです。Okay. Alright. And, Guweiz さん、ありがとうございました。Thank you very much, Guweiz. それでは先ほどの解説についてたくさんのご質問をいただいているようですのでご紹介したいと思います。So now let's take a look at the many questions you left for us during the lecture. Let's see. So let's just dive into it. ではまず一つ質問があるのですが、まず参照画像に関して、グレイスさんは参照画像のこれをボードをどうやって整理をするのでしょうか。あとあまりコピーをこの真似をしすぎないように注意することなどはありますか？ So the question was, how do you keep your reference board simple enough that you don't get lost in too many different styles? And how do you avoid copying too much from the reference?
So that is a great question.
いい質問ですね。
So I think a very important thing when we use reference is to be very specific.
最も画像を参考にするときは最も大事なのは特に何を参考にするかをしっかりと考えておくことです。
For example, we can use a reference specifically for sort of the costume.
例えば衣装のための衣装を参考にするための画像と決めておくことなど。
Or we maybe could also be using the reference to sort of figure out the character's pose.
あるいはキャラのポーズを決めるための参考画像のために使う参考画像であるなど。
So if we are able to be very focused and sort of pick our references very specifically and with purpose.
なのでこのようにしっかりと何のための参考画像なのかを前もって決めておくことで、
we will be able to keep things really simple and clear for ourselves.
そのようにすることで自分のためにこの絵は何のためかというのをシンプルにまとめることができます。
Of course, it also helps that because we are being specific, it becomes really hard to accidentally copy too much.
このように何のための参考画像を決めることで他の余分なものをコピーせずに真似せずに済むというように自分のために決めることが同じくできます。
And that's just because we are taking a specific and small part from each reference, right? To give us the information that we want.
Yes. どの情報を参考にするのかを前もって決めているので、このように必要以上にそのコピーしてしまう、真似してしまうのを防げると思います。
Yep.
Okay. All right. Okay, we still got a few more questions. Okay, I'll start reading it in Japanese first. 下地の灰色はどのような絵でも同じ灰色を使用していますか？それともシチュエーションや背景により違う色を下地として使いますか？という質問です。This question was, does the initial base gray value depend on the scene, or do you always generally start with the same value every time, the same gray value?
Thank you for the question. And the answer is it depends on the scene.
質問ありがとうございます。簡単に答えますと、その場面やシチュエーションによります。
Of course, if you are doing a bright scene, of course you want to make life easier for yourself, right? By using a bright background to start with.
例えば明るいシチュエーションですと、もう背景を明るくすることで、グレーも明るくするというところで始めたいと思いますね。
And the same is true for a dark scene like this.
この絵のような暗いシーンでも同じことが言えます。
Yeah, that is it for this question.
Okay. そんなところですね。Yep, simple enough. Let's see. Okay, we still got plenty of time. Okay, how about this one? メインライトとサブライトが重複するような領域があるライティングを考えたとき、光の混ぜ方のコツなどはあるのでしょうかという質問です。The question was, when considering lighting, the areas where the main light and the sublight overlap, are there any tips on how to mix the lights?
That is a really good question.
いい質問ですね。
Personally, I feel like oftentimes the best choice is to try and not let them touch too much.
個人的には、自分一番いいと思うやり方は、その別種類の光、照明が接触しないようにする方法です。
And the reason is when we have two very strong lights competing, the visual results get muddy.
その理由としては、このような強い照明が混ざり合ってしまうと、結果、最終的に出てくる絵がとても濁った、なんか、ドロッとしたような結果になってしまうのです。
So as you can see here, if I draw my usual glowing earrings for this character, this part of the drawing gets really hard to read, right?
例えば私がいつものようにこの輝くイヤリングなどを描いてしまうと、この部分がとても見づらくなってしまいます。
So we can't really tell whether the blue light is stronger or is the glow stronger.
この青いバックライトが、この黄色い光に対してどちらが強いのかというのが分かりにくくなってしまっていますね。
That is also because a lot of times in real life, when we see sort of two strong lights intersect, our brain kind of chooses one to kind of see, right?
Okay. これなぜかと言いますと、現実でこの2つの強力な照明が当たっている部分を見ると、私たちの脳というのは勝手にどちらの方が強いかというのを決めてしまうんです。
And so even in real life, sometimes the result can look a bit, like very messy as well.
なので現実でも結構2つの強い光が混ざってしまうととても濁った結果、もうちょっと見づらいものになってしまうということが現実でもありえます。
So when we are drawing and have the option, I personally prefer to keep things separated and visually clearer.
なので私は絵を描くときにはあえて2つのタイプの光は混ぜないようにしてすっきりした結果が出るように努めています。
And yeah, that is it for this question.
Okay. 以上です。Thank you very much. That was very helpful, actually. Okay, let's see. Okay, I have another question here. 次の質問になります。揺らぐような光、例えばランタンの光などを光源として用いる場合の、明暗の考え方などはございますか？The question is, what do you think of value when there's a flickering light, example like a lantern, as a light source?
So I would say that it depends on the strength of the light.
やはりこれもその光源の強さによると思います。
Because we are not animating, it's difficult to sort of represent a flickering light directly.
アニメとは違いますので、揺らぐ光の揺らぎというのを表現するのはやはり少し難しいものです。
So, for example, if we have a flickering lamp, we might want to choose something that is a bit weaker in terms of light and value.
なので、例えばこの揺らぐ光のような例ですと、弱い光として表現するのがいいかと思います。
So, for example, if you want to include that flickering light in your drawing, you may want to consider assigning it, let's say, a lower priority.
なので、この揺らいでる光を絵に使うときは、この絵の光の照明の順位として低い、弱いものとして当てがうのがよろしいと思います。
But the main point is, as always, to make sure each light source is distinct.
なので、重ねて言いますが、重要なのは、その光がこの中でどの順位に該当するかをしっかりと決めておくことです。
Yeah, and that's it for this question.
以上になります。Thank you very much. Okay. Okay, just moving along. I'll just go back a little. Here's another question. こちらの質問は、どのようなブラシツールをこの光などの表現、影の表現を使うときに使いますかという質問です。The question is, what kind of brush tool do you suggest using to add lighting or shadow on characters?
So, speaking of brushes, all my most commonly used brushes are free to download from my Patreon. It's free, no membership required.
ブラシといえば、okay. ブラシといえば、私が主に使うブラシは、すべて私のペイトリオン、サイトで無料でダウンロードできますので、まずそれだけをまずはそれをお伝えしたいと思います。Okay?
So to add light, usually I just like to use this really simple, mostly default brush.
まず、sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but please go ahead first.
Sorry about that. まず光を表現するときは、このほぼデフォルトの丸いブラシを使っていきます。Okay, go ahead.
And so we can simply just paint normally. For example, adjusting our brush size if we need to cover a bigger area or making it sharper.
なのでもうこれで特にひねりもなく普通に広い範囲を塗るときはブラシサイズを大きくシャープな線を描くときは小さくして描いていきます。
So the main point is really just to find a brush that you're comfortable with.
重要なのはあなた自身がどのブラシが使いやすいかと感じるかという使いやすいと感じるブラシを見つけることが大事です。
And yeah, that's really it. Just find a brush that you like and it works for you.
Okay. それだけですね。自分が気に入るブラシを見つければいいと思います。はい、以上です。Thank you very much. Okay. I just gotta flip through some of the questions here. Okay. How about this one? 次の質問は、ついバックライトに頼ってしまうんですが、正面ライティングでも印象的にするために意識していらっしゃることはありますでしょうか？ This question was, I tend to rely on backlighting a lot, but is there anything you are aware of to make it more impressive with front lighting? The front lighting, I suppose it means the top lights or yeah.
So
or the side lights.
Yeah, I think I understand it. Yeah.
Okay.
So backlighting is really good because it's dramatic. That is why also you see a lot of times in movies.
バックライトは本当にとても便利で、ドラマチックな演出ができると思います。なので、よく映画で見る理由もこれになります。
As with references, when we choose a light, we also want to be specific as well, right? As to why we do
it. 参考画像などを選ぶときも、ライティングを参考にするときは、どのようなライティングを使いたいかをもうしっかり前もって決めることが重要になります。
So, for example, when we choose a front light, we are trying to show a lot of detail.
例えば正面ライティングを選ぶときは、 ディテールを細かい部分を見せるために使うと思います。
Or we could be trying to highlight something very, very clearly.
あるいは何かを、ハイライト強調するために使う場合もあります。
So when we are using a front light, we want to make sure we are doing those two things, right?
なので正面ライティングを使う場合はその2点を強調する、その2点を行うというのがとても理由になっていると思います。
So for example, in this painting, because the lighting is mostly to be dramatic.
例えばこの参考の絵ではライティングはドラマチックな演出を行うために使っていますので、
I can, not draw the suit in very high detail because, right, again, we don't have the front light.
なので正面ライティングは弱くなってしまい、あまりスーツの細かい部分、ディテールが書き込めなくなっています。
So if you want to say draw front light with this same character, you have to be prepared to draw the creases and folds on the suit very well.
I'm very sorry. What was the first half? You said you need to, yeah.
So if you were to draw the same character with front light, you have to draw the creases of the suit and all the small details very well.
Thank you very much. なので、フロントライトをもっと強く描く場合には、こちらのスーツのよれやシワなどをもっと細かくしっかりと描くことが必要になってしまいます。
And since I am not good at that, I chose to use backlight for this character.
で、私は個人的にあまりそれは得意ではないので、このようにバックライトを強調するようにこの絵を選びました。Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Let's see. Okay, let me take, okay. Yeah, looks like we got quite a bit of questions, so I'm gonna have to go through more. Okay, how about this one? 次の質問は、構図の勉強はどのようにすればいいでしょうか？例えば、光源の位置や物の配置を考えるにはどのような練習をすれば良いでしょうか？ This question was, how do we start learning good composition styles? Choosing the correct lighting angles to complement the overall visual composition in our illustrations. Any practice or warm-up suggestions?
So I will always recommend looking at more references.
これに関してはもうとにかく参考画像を多く使うことをお勧めします。
They can be from things like films or games or really any source of media that you've seen and liked.
とにかくどのようなメディアからでも、例えば映画やゲーム、自分が気に入ったと思った作品からいろいろ参考にするというのをお勧めします。
And when you sort of gather these references, a good practice to do is to observe them really closely.
練習に関してはこちらの参考画像をとにかくよく観察するということです。
And then again, be very specific as to why you like each part of the reference.
そして先ほどのようにとにかくこの参考画像の何が気に入っているかというのを改めて前もって決めていくというのがとても重要です。
So try to practice this often and you'll be able to sort of get a good feel of what you like and don't like.
これを繰り返していけば自分が特にどのような表現が好きで嫌いあるいは嫌いなのかがはっきりと分かっていくようになります。
Yeah, that's it for this question.
That's it. Okay. 以上になります。ありがとうございました。では他に質問。 Oh, here's kind of a bit of a different question. 少しジャンルの違う質問ですが、好きなアーティストや参考にしているアーティストはいますか？ So do you have any particular favorite artists you reference from?
So personally, I find when earlier on as I was drawing, like earlier years ago, I like to look at a lot of artists' works.
私、もっと昔の頃はいろんなアーティストを見るのが本当に好きでした。
But as I draw more, I tend to have sort of my own visual that I like more.
でも経験を重ねていくごとに自分の好きなスタイルというのがどんどん出来上がっていきました。
So it starts becoming hard to reference directly from other artists.
なので他のアーティストさんの作品を直接参考にするというのはどんどん難しくなっていきました。
And so it becomes more of a inspiration, right? Because you can see something that you like, but you only take like the core idea, right? And try something.
なので直接参考にするというよりはインスピレーション、何か着想を得る、何か発想の種を得るみたいなそういうのを得るための参考という感じになっていきますね。
So, for example, if you were to look at this particular painting, a good way to reference it would be to sort of think about the lighting setup, right?
例えばこのこれを参考にしますと、ここからはこの絵の照明の使い方を参考にすることになりますよね。
And then you could draw your own character in your own scene, but try a lighting similar to this.
それを参考にして自分のスタイルで自分のキャラクターを描いて、でも照明の使い方だけを参考にして描いていくことになると思います。
And for example, you wouldn't be referencing things like how to draw small details like this, right?
反して例えばこのような細かい書き込みなどはあまり参考にされないと思われます。
Firstly, it's because then you're not really using your brain to sort of think about your own drawing.
そういうことをしてしまうと自分の絵ということを考えなくなってしまうと思うのです。
And secondly, I don't draw these details very well, so you might be making a mistake copying my stuff.
I wouldn't say so, but なんか次に私はこのようなディテールが細かい書き込みがあまり得意ではないと思っていますので、多分それを真似てしまうのはあなたにとって間違いだと思います。失敗だと思います。
Okay. But in terms of favorite artists, I definitely still have many. For example, I always say this when people ask me, I like Zine's work a lot, if you may have seen him on the internet.
Zine。しかし、このお気に入りのアーティストさんといえば、私は聞かれるときには、こちらのジーン・チンさんという方を必ず挙げます。
So his works are really creative. You should take a look at it for yourself, and it's really inspirational, right?
彼の絵は本当に独創的でクリエイティブで、もうぜひ皆さんも参考に見てみるといいと思います。
Yeah, so that's the answer to what's your, like one artist that you really like.
Okay. 以上ですね。私が
And of course, there are many others, but I just wanted to mention like a very standout one to me personally.
Okay. もちろん他にもたくさんいますが、とりあえず彼を進めておきたいと思って名前を挙げておきました。Okay. Thank you very much. 以上です。Okay. Let's see. Okay, moving on to next question. Okay. 次の質問ですが、 光が当たっている部分の端をぼかすか、きっぱりした境界線で描くか、どのように判断していますかというものです。Excuse me. The next question is, how do you determine when to use soft edges and strong edges to lights and shadows, for lights and shadows?
So for this part, I would say to, again, right, look very closely at reference.
こちらの質問に関しても、やはり参考画像をとにかく強く使うことを強くお勧めします。
So a quick example here is the difference between the sort of fabric of the inner sleeve and the suit sleeve.
例えばこちらの、内側のスリーブとスーツの袖の違いを挙げていきたいと思います。
So because of the thinness, the thin fabric here, the edge is very sharp, whereas in the suit, we have a bit of a bevel, right?
例えばこのインナーのシャツの袖はとても薄い生地ですので、端もくっきりと描かれます。対してスーツは折り目があるので太めの線という描写になっております。
But honestly, I think as long as you pay somewhat of a bit of attention to these things.
でもこういうですがこういう細かい部分にちゃんと目をちゃんと観察していけば良いと思います。
You don't have to worry too much about soft and hard edges.
そうしていればこのようにそのような柔らかい端のぼかしやきっかりした線の違いというのはあまり心配する必要はない。観察をしていれば心配する必要はないと思います。
So basically just keep an eye out for some basic accuracy and then it's fine to experiment.
なのでそういう基本的な部分を押さえておけば多少の実験的な色の付け方はぜひやってみればいいと思っています。
That's it for this question.
Okay, thank you very much. 今の質問は以上になります。Okay. So it looks like we only have time for one last question. Okay. I'll just read this in Japanese quickly. こちら最後の時間も迫っていますので最後の質問になります。スランプなどは経験したことはありますか？そういった時はどうするといいと思いますか？This question was, have you ever experienced any moments of stump, or in other words, have you experienced artist block? What would your solution be to overcome these issues?
So it's difficult because it feels different for everyone.
これは人によって本当に違うので難しい質問ですね。
So for me personally, I sometimes struggle with choosing one, idea to draw.
私の場合は何か一つのアイデアに絞るということにとても、問題が起こってしまいます。
And again, everyone sort of approaches this differently. So that's really important to know.
でもやはり皆さんそれぞれ違うこの問題の解決の仕方、アプローチの仕方があると思いますので、それは絶対に意識しておいてください。
But for me personally, I just feel like a good solution is to at least start drawing something and not have a blank canvas.
ですが、それでも私個人の場合ですと、とにかく何かを書き始めるということが大事と思います。キャンバスを真っ白にしておくというのは絶対に避けています。
That's it for this question.
Okay. Thank you very much. 今の質問は以上になります。So I believe that's all the time we have for questions. So, anyways. では、 たくさんの質問をいただいておりますが、そろそろ終了のお時間となってしまいました。お答えできなかった皆様は誠に申し訳ありませんが、ここまでとさせていただきます。So yeah, thanks for all the questions you gave us, but I'm afraid it's almost time to wrap up. Really sorry we couldn't answer all the questions, and so that will be the end of the Q&A session right now. Okay. それでは作品投稿の方法についてご説明します。Now we're going to explain how to go about submitting your work. プログラムで説明した技法をご自身の作品に実践して作品をpixivに指定のタグをつけてご投稿ください。タグはハッシュタグ Drawfest3 Guweiz です。コピペが必要な方はYouTube の概要欄にも記載していますので、そちらをお使いください。Practice the techniques explained in the program on works of your own and post it in pixiv with the tag hashtag Drawfest3 Guweiz. If you prefer to copy and paste it, please use the tag provided in the description below here on YouTube. 投稿期間はフィードバックデー前日の6月24日までに投稿された作品が選考の対象となります。Only submissions received until Friday, June 24th, the day before Feedback Day, will be eligible for the competition. 作品投稿に関しては6月1日から6月30日まで投稿ページを設けておりますが、選考対象になるのは6月24日までの投稿作品に限ります。Although we have a dedicated submission page open from June 1st through June 30th, let me stress that only submissions received by Friday, June 24th will be considered eligible for prize selection. ルールとしては、Drawfest3 のプログラムに関連する作品であること、投稿期間内のもの、指定のタグがついた状態で投稿されているものに限らせていただきます。詳細については概要欄にあるpixivの投稿企画ページをご覧ください。Submitted works must be related to the Drawfest3 program and must be entered within the submission period with the specific tags attached. For more details, please refer to the contest outline section on the pixiv submission page. 来週のフィードバックデーではご投稿いただきました作品の紹介や改善点などアドバイスを行います。また、Guweizさんより本プログラムの受賞作品 Guweiz 賞を選んでいただきます。On Feedback Day next week, we will showcase some of the submitted artworks and offer advice on how to improve them. Guweiz will also select a winner for this program who will take home the Guweiz Prize. 受賞された方には商品として液晶ペンタブレット Wacom 1液晶タブレット13が贈呈されます。The winner will receive a Wacom 1 pen display as a prize. 本日のプログラムは来週のフィードバックデーまでに同じ URL でアーカイブ視聴ができます。絵を描いている途中でわからなくなったときはいつでも振り返ってみてください。An archive video of today's program will be available at the same URL until next week's feedback day. If you get lost in the process along the way, you can always look back at the video again. それでは皆さん、ふるってご参加をお願いします。So everyone, we look forward to your participation. Alright. Guweiz さん、本日、影に潜むかっこいい女性の描き方というテーマでお話しいただきましたが、改めましていかがでしたか。So Guweiz, first of all, thank you very much for answering all those questions. I felt like I kind of cut you off there. Really sorry about that.
That's
okay. So today you spoke to us about how to draw cool female characters in the shade. So how did you like it today?
So it was really fun to basically answer all the questions. No worries. And thank you, Michael, very much for your great translating.
Oh, thank you so much.
And yeah, so I hope everyone just have fun, and that's it. Just enjoy the video and try your best to sort of pick up some of the techniques and mostly to have fun. Yeah.
まず皆さん本当に今日は楽しませていただきました。質疑応答もとても楽しく させていただきました。ありがとうございます。もう皆さんまたわからなくなった時はぜひ動画をまた見返して、でもとにかく楽しむということを忘れずにぜひ絵を描いてください。ありがとうございます。Yeah, thank you very much, Guweiz. The Guweiz さんの画集 The Art of GUWEIZ は英語版、日本語版ともに発売されています。Guweiz artbook, The Art of GUWEIZ is available in both English and Japanese. 今回の登録特典として 3D トータルさんから英語版のデジタル画集のサンプルと割引コードが提供されています。グエイズさんのことや絵に関して考えていることをより深く知ることができるので、購入を検討している方がいればぜひ確認してみてください。As a special offer for registering, 3D Total is providing samples and discount codes for the English version of the digital book. So if you are considering purchasing the book, please check it out to learn more about Guweiz and inside the mind of this creator. 最後にこの後のプログラムのご案内です。Finally, here's some information on our event's next programs. この後11時日本時間から次のプログラム、ミカ・ピカッツォが花節に学ぶイラストアニメーション道場。Directly after this, at 10 p.m. Eastern US time, we'll have Mika Picasso learn some Hanabushi illustration animation dojo. 13時日本時間は原神×波へさまざまな色と質感で可愛いキャラクターとシーンを作ろうを予定しています。From 12 o'clock midnight Eastern US time is Genshin Namie. Let's create cute characters and scenes with a variety of colors and textures. こちらも豪華登壇者による創作活動に必ず役立つ内容となっておりますので、ぜひ引き続きご視聴ください。This is another event that will surely be useful in your creative endeavors. Be sure to tune in. こちらの番組は現在の配信と URL が異なりますので、事前にお送りしていますリンクを間違えないようにご注意ください。The URL for this program is different from the current one. Please make sure to use the correct link sent to you in advance. Drawfest3 最初のプログラムはグエイスさんと学ぶ影に潜むかっこいい女性の描き方をお送りしました。グエイスさんありがとうございます。ありがとうございました。That's a wrap for Drawfest3's first program, Learn with Guweiz, How to Draw Cool Female Characters in the Shade. Thank you very much, Guweiz.
Thank you again for having me.
いや、またお呼びいただき誠にありがとうございます。Thank you very much for coming. And that'll be all. ありがとうございました。